Do not mind her, your grace. She is only the girl who does the flowers. Plain as a post and half as clever, poor thing. But she has a way with the arrangements, and one must put someone to task. Sebastian, Duke of Hollowell, did not answer his hostess at once, because he was looking at the girl who did the flowers, and he was trying to understand why a room full of jeweled women in the first stare of fashion had left him entirely cold, and this one, kneeling at the great urn by the terrace doors with her sleeves pushed back and a fall of dark hair coming loose from its pins, wholly absorbed in the roses she was setting, unaware that anyone watched her, had stopped him in the doorway as though he had walked into glass. She was not plain. That was his first clear thought, and it arrived with the force of an accusation against everyone in the room. Whoever had called her plain had done it so often, and so loudly, that the whole company had simply agreed to believe it without ever looking, the way a whole company will believe anything it is told often enough. But Sebastian was looking, and what he saw was a girl with a grave sweet face bent over her work, her hands quick and sure among the blooms, a smudge of green on her wrist and an expression of such quiet, private contentment in the doing of a task everyone else in the room considered beneath them, that he found her, without the smallest exaggeration, the loveliest thing in a house famous for its beauties. Who is she? Lady Marchmain blinked, as though the question itself were a small social error. The girl, Eloise Thorne. Sir Henry Thorne's daughter, the first wife's, you understand, before he married again. He died some years ago and left the girl to her stepmother, Lady Thorne, who is here tonight and a great friend of mine. Lady Thorne has been all that is generous, gives the girl a home, brings her about, though of course there can be no question of a match for her, no fortune and no, the hostess lowered her voice delicately, no accomplishments to speak of, and rather backward in company. Lady Thorne despairs of her, she only brings her to be useful. The girl is clever with flowers and quiet as a mouse, and she keeps out of the way, which is the most one can ask. She brightened. But you must not waste your evening on the flower girl, your grace. Let me present you to my niece, such a voice, and just returned from Italy. Presently, said Sebastian, and crossed the room to the flowers. He was aware, as he moved, of the sensation his crossing caused. The Duke of Hollowell was the great prize of 3 seasons, the coldest and most pursued man in London, and his every step in a ballroom was tracked like a hare by hounds. He watched the calculation ripple across the room, the mother's straightening, the daughter's angling, the swift silent question of where he was going and which fortunate girl was about to be favoured. And he watched the moment the question curdled, as it became clear that the Duke of Hollowell was walking, deliberately and unmistakably, toward the girl kneeling by the flowers whom everyone had agreed was nothing at all. Eloise Thorne did not notice him until his shadow fell across the urn. Then she looked up, startled, a rose still in her hand, and Sebastian saw her face at close quarters for the first time, and saw in it, before she could hide it, the thing that undid him, not the practiced coquetry of every other woman who had ever looked up at his approach, but a flare of pure alarm, the flinch of a person so accustomed to being scolded that the mere attention of a great personage could mean only that she had done something wrong. Your Grace. She scrambled to rise, the rose forgotten, her cheeks flooding with colour. Forgive me, I did know anyone was. I will move directly. I did not mean to be underfoot. I only had these last few to. Do not move on my account, Sebastian said. I came to watch you work. I have been standing in that doorway for a quarter of an hour, Miss Thorne, and yours is the only thing worth looking at in the entire room. She stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign tongue. You are teasing me, she said at last, very low, and there was no anger in it, only a wary, resigned certainty, the voice of a person for whom the notice of the great had never once meant anything but ridicule. It is all right, Your Grace. I am quite used to it. If you have come to be amused at the flower girl, you may be amused. I would only ask that you do it quietly, so that my stepmother does not hear, for she will blame me for having drawn your attention, and it will go the worse for me. That is all. Be as amused as you like, only softly. Sebastian felt something turn over in his chest, cold and sharp. I am not teasing you, he said, and I have never been more in earnest in my life. Miss Thorne, I do not know who taught you that a man crossing a room to speak to you must be mocking you, but they have done you a great wrong, and I should like, if you will permit me, to prove them liars." He glanced down at the urn. "Tell me about the roses. Why the white ones there, not the pink? You have set them very deliberately. There is a reason. I should like to hear it." She hesitated, searching his face for the trap. She had, he thought, spent her whole life searching faces for the trap. It had become as natural to her as breathing. But she found none in his. He made certain she found none, and slowly, warily, like a creature coaxed from cover, she answered him. "The white catch the candlelight," she said. "The pink go grey in the evening, they lose themselves. But the white seem almost to hold a light of their own after dark, and so I put them where the room will be dim later, by the doors, and the pink nearer the chandelier where the light is strong enough to keep their colour. And the greenery low, so it does not hide the terrace beyond, for the whole point of an arrangement by a door is that it should lead the eye out and not stop it." She said it quickly, quietly, her hands moving as she spoke, and then she caught herself, and flushed, and stopped. "It is a foolish thing to trouble a duke with. I am sorry. My stepmother says I run on about nonsense when I am nervous, and that no one wishes to hear a girl's opinions on." "It is not foolish," Sebastian interrupted. "It is the most intelligent thing anyone has said to me all evening. You have thought about light, and about how a room moves, and about where an eye wishes to travel. You have thought, Miss Thorne, which is more than 3/4 of the beauties in this house have done in their whole lives. Your stepmother is mistaken. Profoundly, and I begin to think deliberately mistaken." He watched the word land, mistaken, watched it strike some deep place in her that had never once been struck before, and he saw the girl go absolutely still, the rose trembling faintly in her hand, and he understood, with a clarity that made him quietly furious, that no one had ever told her such a thing in the whole of her life, that she had been told, instead, every day and in 100 ways, that she was plain and dull and backward and nothing, until she had built her entire self around the believing of it, and that the small kindness of a stranger admiring her flowers had shaken that whole structure to its foundations and frightened her half to death. "You should not say such things to me, Your Grace," she whispered. "Please, you do not understand. If she sees you speaking to me, if she thinks I have been putting myself forward, you cannot know what she is like when we are home again. It is easier, it is so much easier, if I am simply the girl who does the flowers and no one looks at me at all. I have made my peace with it. I beg you not to disturb it. Kindness costs me more than cruelty does in the end. I have no defense against it." Her eyes had gone bright. "Cruelty I know how to survive. I have had years of practice. But you are being kind, and I do not know how to survive that, and I am going to cry in front of 100 people over an urn of roses, and my stepmother will never let me forget it. Please, go and admire the niece from Italy. It is what everyone expects. It is safe." Sebastian looked at her for a long moment, at the bright eyes she was fighting to master, at the green smudge on her wrist, at the loveliest and most thoroughly convinced of her own nothingness creature he had ever encountered, and he made, standing there by the terrace doors, the decision that would order the rest of his life. "I have spent 3 seasons," he said quietly, "being pursued by every ambitious mother in England, and being bored to the edge of despair by it, and telling myself that there was simply no one worth the trouble of feeling anything for. I was wrong. There was someone. She was kneeling by the flowers where they had put her so that no one would look, and I nearly did not look either, and it would have been the great mistake of my life. I am not going to admire the niece from Italy, Miss Thorne. I am going to stay exactly here, and talk to you about roses, and let the whole room see me do it, and if your stepmother does not care for it, she may take the matter up with me, and I promise you she will find it a very different thing to be cruel to a duke than to a girl who has no one to defend her. You have someone now. You do not yet believe it. That is all right. I have a great deal of patience, and I intend to spend all of it convincing you." Lady Thorne descended upon them within the minute. Sebastian saw her coming, a handsome, hard-faced woman in expensive plum silk, sailing across the room with a fixed bright smile and murder in her eyes, and he understood the whole of her at a glance, because he had met 100 like her in 100 drawing rooms, the kind of cruelty that dresses well and speaks softly and does its worst in private. She reached them in a rustle of silk and dropped him a curtsy of exquisite depth, and when she straightened her smile was radiant and her voice was honey. "Your Grace, you are too good. I see my dear Lois has been boring you with her little flowers. You must forgive her. She is a shy, awkward creature. No conversation at all. We can none of us get 2 sensible words from her. Aloys, do not impose upon his Grace's kindness. Go and see whether the musicians want for anything. There's a good girl, and leave the Duke in peace." The honey did not quite cover the steel beneath it. The girl went white at the sound of it, and half turned to obey, the instinct of years. "Miss Thorne will stay where she is," said Sebastian. Lady Thorne's smile flickered. "Your Grace is very gracious, but truly she is not fit company for Lady Thorne." He'd not raise his voice. He had learned long ago that a duke never needed to. "I have been speaking with your stepdaughter for some 10 minutes, and in that time she has told me more of intelligence and observation than I have heard from this entire assembly in the course of a season. You describe her as awkward, shy, without conversation, a plain, dull, backward creature who bores her company. I find I cannot reconcile your account with the young woman I have been speaking to, and I am forced to one of 2 conclusions. Either you have never once troubled to listen to her, or you have listened and understood exactly what she is and chosen to tell the world otherwise. I confess I do not know which is the crueler, and I find I do not much care, because the effect is the same. You have spent years teaching this young woman that she is nothing. You have very nearly succeeded. And I have decided to spend as many years as it takes teaching her the truth, which is that she is worth more than every jeweled fortune hunter in this room laid end to end, and I should be obliged if you would not interfere with the lesson." The room had gone quiet. People were listening now, drawn by the sight of the great Duke of Hollowell standing over the flower girl and her elegant stepmother, and Lady Thorne, who had built her whole cruelty on the certainty that no one important would ever take the girl's side, found herself for the first time in years without a script. Her mouth opened and closed. The bright smile cracked and reassembled. "Your Grace mistakes me," she said, her voice climbing. "I am all devotion to the girl. I have given her a home, brought her out, sacrificed a great deal. She is not always grateful. Girls of her sort rarely are, but I have never." "Aloys," Sebastian said, without taking his eyes from Lady Thorne, "is that true? Has she been kind to you?" And there it was, the cruelest position of all, the girl caught between the Duke who defended her and the woman who ruled her, knowing that whatever she answered she would pay for. He saw the terror of it flood her face. He saw her open her mouth to say yes, of course. She is all kindness. The answer years had drilled into her, the safe answer, the survivable one. And then he saw something else. He saw her look at him, at the plain, patient, unwavering fact of him standing between her and the woman she feared. And he saw her understand, perhaps for the first time in her life, that there was another person in the room, and that the person was not going anywhere, and that she was, just possibly, not alone. "No," said Aloys Thorne. The word fell into the silent room like a stone into a still pond. Lady Thorne went rigid. The girl was shaking, but she went on, her voice small and clear and gathering strength as it went, as though a door long jammed had finally given way. "No, Your Grace, she has not been kind. She has told me every day since my father died that I am plain and stupid and a burden and worthless, and lucky she troubles to keep me at all, and that no one would ever want me, and I believed her, because when a thing is said to you every day for years you cannot help but believe it. There is no defense against it. It becomes the floor you stand on." A tear spilled over and she let it. "She brings me to these houses to do the flowers and be useful and be reminded, in front of everyone, of exactly how little I am. And I have never said so to a living soul, because there was no one to say it to, and no one would have believed the flower girl over the fine Lady Thorne. But you asked me plainly, and you told me not to lie for anyone's sake, and I am so tired, Your Grace. I am so tired of pretending she is kind." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Thorne stood exposed in the centre of the finest drawing-room in London, before the very company whose good opinion was the whole of her currency, and Sebastian watched her understand the completeness of the disaster. She had built her cruelty in private and trusted the private to keep it. She had never imagined that the girl would speak, or that anyone would be standing there to make the speaking safe. Now the girl had spoken, and a duke had made her safe, and the whole room had heard, and there was no only sentence in the world that could unsay it. She is lying, Lady Thorne said, but her voice had gone shrill, and no one in the room believed her, and she knew it. The girl is hysterical, ungrateful. You can all see she is not right. She has always been. I can see, said Lady Marchmain unexpectedly, that I have watched you send that child to do the flowers at every house in London for 3 years while your own daughters sat idle, Augusta, and I have said nothing, because it was not my affair. I find I am rather ashamed of that now. The hostess's voice was cold. His Grace asked the girl a plain question, and she answered it plainly, and I believe her, and so does everyone in this room, and I think, Augusta, that you had better take your carriage and go home, before you say anything further that we shall all have to remember. It was the turning of the tide. Sebastian watched it turn, watched the room, which a moment before would have taken the fine lady's word over the flower girls without a thought, swing entirely, the way a room does when it is given permission to believe what it has half suspected all along. Faces that had never spared Aloys a glance now looked at Lady Thorne with open distaste. A whisper began and spread, and Lady Thorne Ashen, her whole edifice collapsed in the space of 2 minutes, gathered the shreds of her dignity and swept from the room, and was not received in that house, or in most others, ever again, for cruelty, once exposed before the people it had relied upon to look away, finds those people remarkably unforgiving of having been made complicit. Sebastian did not watch her go. He had already turned to Aloys, who stood trembling and weeping and wide-eyed by her flowers, plainly terrified now of what she had done, certain in her bones that she would be made to pay for it as she had been made to pay for everything. "Come," he said gently. "You are shaking. Sit." He drew her to a chair by the terrace doors, into the dim where her white roses held their glow, and he crouched before her so that his face was level with hers, and he took her cold hand in his without the smallest ceremony. "It is done. She is gone. You will never live in that woman's house again, Aloys. I promise you that before all these witnesses, and there are a great many of them, so it is a promise I cannot break. You said the true thing at last out loud, and the sky did not fall. Do you feel it? The sky did not fall. It never would have. She only told you it would to keep you quiet. I do not know what to do," Aloys whispered. "I have nowhere to go. I have no money, no. I have only ever been the girl who does the flowers. I do not know how to be anything else. And now I have said all that and I have nowhere." "You have somewhere," Sebastian said. "You have wherever you like." "That is the thing she never told you, because it was the thing that would have set you free. You were never nothing, Aloys. You were only told you were, by a woman who needed you small so that she might feel large. It is the oldest cruelty there is and the emptiest, and it ends tonight." He looked at her, at the wet grave lovely face, and he felt the whole cold-bored weariness of 3 seasons lift off him and blow away like smoke. "I told you I would spend as many years as it took to convince you of your worth. I meant it more lightly then than I mean it now. Now I find I do not want to spend a few years convincing you. I want to spend all of them. Do you understand what I am saying?" She stared at him. "You cannot mean—" "I mean," said Sebastian, Duke of Hollowell, kneeling before the flower girl in the sight of all London, "that I have been looking for 3 seasons for a reason to feel anything at all, and I found it in a girl kneeling by an urn who thought a kind word must be a trap. I do not want the niece from Italy or any of the jeweled fortunes in this room. I want the woman who understands why the white roses go by the door. I am not asking tonight. You have had shock enough for one evening, and I will not have you say yes out of fear or gratitude, for you have had a lifetime of doing things out of fear, and I will not add to it. I am only telling you so that you may sleep on it and wake knowing it is true. You are wanted, Aloys Thorne, wholly, and for yourself, and by a man who has never wanted anything before. Whatever you have been told, you may lay it down now. It was never true. Lady Marchmain took her in that very night, and would hear no argument about it. You will stay with me, child, until this is sorted, and it will be sorted, for I mean to see to it personally, and Augusta Thorne may whistle for her respectability in the meantime. And so Aloys Thorne, who had gone to the ball as the flower girl, slept that night in a fine guest chamber under the protection of one of the great hostesses of London, and woke, as Sebastian had promised, to find that the world had rearranged itself entirely while she slept and that the rearrangement held. He called the next day and the next, and he'd not rush her. That was the thing he set himself to hardest, the patience of it, the not rushing, because he understood that a woman taught for years that she was nothing could not be made to believe otherwise in an afternoon, and that his own certainty, however true, could become just one more powerful voice telling her what she was, and he did not want to be that. He wanted her to arrive at her own worth in her own time, and know it as her own, and not as a gift he had bestowed. So he came and he talked with her. And above all, he listened to her, listened until she began, slowly, haltingly, to believe that her words were worth the listening, and he watched her unfold over the following weeks the way he had watched nothing in his cold life, watched the flinch go out her by degrees, watched her learn to look up when someone approached without expecting a blow, watched her laugh for the first time, and then look astonished at the sound as though she had forgotten she owned it. Lady Marchmain, who had appointed herself the girl's champion with the zeal of the newly repentant, took her about London as her own guest, and the same society that had for 3 years accepted Lady Thorne's account of the plain dull flower girl now discovered, examining her at closer range, that she was nothing of the sort, that she was quietly lovely and quietly clever, and that her supposed backwardness had been merely the silence of a person never once permitted to speak. The story of the ball had gone everywhere. Lady Thorne was finished, and Eloise, by the same stroke, became the most talked of young woman of the season. The flower girl the Duke of Hollowell had defended before all London, and the drawing-rooms that had ignored her now competed to claim her. She bore it, Sebastian noted with quiet pride, better than he had feared and better than most would have. The sudden fashionable attention did not turn her head, because she had been too thoroughly schooled in its opposite to trust it. She received the new flatterers with the same grave wariness she had once received cruelty, and privately, to him, she confessed she found them harder to credit than her stepmother's insults. At least the insults, I understood, she told him one afternoon in Lady Marchmain's garden, among the roses she had already begun to reorder to her own better taste. I knew where I stood with them. All this admiration, I keep waiting for it to turn out to be the trap after all. I do not think I shall ever quite believe it. You do not have to believe them, Sebastian said. They are fools, and their admiration is worth exactly what their contempt was worth, which is nothing. You need only believe one person, and take your time about even that. He paused. May I tell you which person? She looked up at him, and there was something new in her face now, 6 weeks on, not yet confidence, but the first green shoot of it, the beginning of a woman who might one day know her own worth without being told. You need not, she said softly. I have known which person since the night of the roses. I have only been waiting to be brave enough to say so. You told me you would not rush me, and you have not, and has let me arrive here myself in my own time, which I think is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. So I will say it, Sebastian, I believe you. When you tell me I am worth something, I believe you, not because you are a duke and grand, but because you are the only person who ever looked at me before deciding what I was, and I have come to trust your eyes more than the whole world's. She drew a breath. So if the thing you said that first night still stands, it stands, said Sebastian. It will stand for the rest of my life. Then yes, said Eloise Thorne, yes. I should like to be wanted, wholly, and for myself, by the man who understands about the white roses. I should like it more than anything in the world. There was one evening in the weeks between the betrothal and the wedding that Sebastian afterward counted among the dearest of his life, because it was the evening he saw, for the first time, exactly what Eloise was going to become. Lady Marchmain had given a great dinner to present the future Duchess of Hollowell to society properly, and the same rooms that had once held the flower girl at the terrace doors now received her as the guest of honour, and the reversal was so complete that even Sebastian, who had engineered a good deal of it, found it remarkable. But not all the old cruelty had died with Lady Thorne's disgrace. There is always a certain kind of woman who cannot bear another's good fortune, and one such, a Mrs. Delford, whose own daughters had angled for the Duke for 3 seasons and lost, could not let the evening pass without a barb. How charming, she said in a carrying voice, as the company took their seats, that his Grace has chosen a bride with such practical skills. I am sure the flowers at Hollowell will never want for arranging now. One does like a duchess who can make herself useful below stairs." The old Aloys would have flushed and shrunk and said nothing, and Sebastian half rose to answer for her, and then felt her hand on his arm, staying him, and sat back and watched. "You are very kind, Mrs. Delford," said Aloys, in a clear, pleasant voice that carried quelt as the barb had. "I confess I am rather proud of my flowers. It is true I learned to arrange them below stairs, as you say. I learned a great many useful things there, in the years when I was given no other place to be. I learned how a room moves and where an eye wishes to travel, and how a white rose holds the light after dark when a fine jewel has gone dull and grey. And I learned," she smiled gently, and let the smile rest a moment on Mrs. Delford's reddening face, "that the people who look down longest on the ones doing the useful work are very often the ones who have never in their lives made anything at all, and are more frightened of that than they would ever admit. I do not think it a shame to be useful, Mrs. Delford. I think it the only thing that is not a shame. But I would not expect everyone to agree. It takes a certain security to value a thing one cannot do oneself." The table was silent for a breath. And then Lady Marchmain laughed aloud, and the laughter spread, and Mrs. Delford, quite outmanoeuvred, retreated into her soup and did not venture another word all evening. Later in the drawing-room, Sebastian found Aloys by the window, and stood beside her and said quietly, "You did not need me. Do you know that is the first time? A month ago I stood between you and Lady Thorne because you had no one. Tonight you did not need me at all. You answered her yourself, and better than I could have, and I merely had the pleasure of watching." Aloys looked up at him, and there was wonder in her face, as though she too had only just realized it. "I did, didn't I?" she said slowly. I answered her. "I did not shrink. I have been shrinking my whole life, Sebastian. It was the only thing I knew how to do when someone was cruel, and tonight I simply did not. I heard her, and I was not afraid, and the words were just there." She pressed a hand to her breast, half laughing, half marveling. "Where did they come from? I have never had words like that in my life." "They were always there," Sebastian said. "You were only never permitted to use them. That is all I have done, Aloys. I have not given you anything you did not already own. I have only stood beside you long enough for you to find it. And you have found it, and now no one will ever take it from you again. And I want you to remember tonight, always, as the night you learned that you can defend yourself, so that if I am ever not at your side, you will know you are not without a champion. You will have the best one there is. You will have you." He raised her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Though I intend to be at your side regardless, for a very long time, so that you need never test the point unless it amuses you." She laughed then, freely, the whole undefended sound of it filling the window bay, and Sebastian thought that he could have listened to nothing else for the rest of his life and counted himself the most fortunate man in England. They were married in the summer at Hollowell, in a chapel that Aloys herself had filled with flowers, white roses by the doors, where the evening light would find them, and pink nearer the high windows where the sun kept their colour, and the greenery set low so that the eye was led out to the gardens beyond and never stopped. The whole county came, and half of London, and they remarked to one another that they had never seen a chapel so beautifully done, and asked who had arranged it, and were told, with what had become a general and slightly shamefaced admiration, that the new Duchess had done it with her own hands. For she had a rare gift for such things, though of course no one had troubled to notice it when she was only the flower girl. Sebastian stood at the front of the chapel and watched her come to him down the aisle, and he thought that he had been a cold and bored and half-dead man for 3 seasons, and had not known it until the evening he walked into a room and found a girl kneeling by an urn who had taught herself the whole of her worth from a bank of roses, because no human being had ever offered her any. She came to him now in ivory silk, her dark hair dressed with white roses, her grave sweet face turned up to his, and the flinch was gone from it entirely, gone, he thought, replaced by a quiet, settled, hard-won certainty that made her, to his eyes, more beautiful than every jewelled beauty who had ever pursued him. Lady Thorne was not there. She had not been asked, and would not have been received, and had in any case retired in disgrace to a distant relation's house in the country, Her London career ended. Her cruelty exposed and remembered and unforgiven, spending her days, one heard, in a bitterness that fed on itself, which was the only fitting punishment, and one she administered entirely to herself. Eloise did not speak of her, and Sebastian did not raise her, and the silence around the woman's name was the completest revenge either of them could have devised, for they simply went on and were happy, and let her be forgotten, which for a person like Lady Thorne was a fate worse than any scandal. When Eloise reached him at the altar, Sebastian took both her hands, and before the vicar could begin he said low, so that only she could hear it, "Do you remember what you told me? That kindness cost you more than cruelty, that you had no offence against it." "I remember," she whispered. "You have a defence now," he said. "You have a whole life of it coming. I am going to be kind to you every day until it stops frightening you and starts feeling like the floor you stand on, until the thing you cannot help believing, the way you once could not help believing you were nothing, is that you are cherished. It will take years. I have them. I have all of them, and I intend to spend every one, and at the end of it you will know your own worth so completely that you will laugh to remember you ever doubted it. That is my wedding gift to you, Eloise. Not the house, not the coronet, the years, as many as it takes." And Eloise Thorne, who had once been told she was nothing so often that she built her whole self upon it, looked up at the man who had crossed a crowded room to the girl everyone had agreed to overlook, and smiled at him with a whole unfrightened face, and said, "Then I had better marry you quickly, your grace, before you change your mind and the roses wilt." He laughed. The whole chapel heard the Duke of Hollowell laugh, a thing few of them had ever witnessed, and the vicar began, "And outside the summer light lay gold across the gardens she had already begun to make more beautiful, and the white roses by the door waited, as she had set them, to hold their quiet glow when the evening came.